Okay, so a few days ago on the way home from work, I went by a section near my house and something happened with my tire. So clearly I got some sort of puncture or something, and if you look at the result here, it's not pretty. Now, what I've seen in the past often happens is it's not actually a puncture, but there's just some something where the stem goes in is what breaks around there. So obviously I can't ride it in this condition, and perhaps more to the point, if I leave it this way, then it may damage the tire, assuming it's not already damaged beyond repair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take off this wheel and then remove the tire. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed the wheel. Now what you would normally want to do is put your bike up on a bike stand to remove the wheel. If you can't do that, you might turn it upside down. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have a good place to turn it upside down without bringing the bike inside, and I didn't want to do that. So, what I've done is I've used some styrofoam blocks to perch the bike up. There's two reasons for that. One is so that the back end doesn't scrape on the concrete, but more importantly is that the derailleur is not designed to handle the weight of the bike. So in order to prevent the derailleur from holding any weight, I've perched the bike on the styrofoam blocks. I did go ahead and put the through axle back in the bike just to make sure there's no possibility that it could be lost or damaged. And I also put a chock in the disc brake just to make sure that that doesn't accidentally close. So now that I have the wheel out of the bike, we can take a better look at it. It certainly is quite a big hole, because not only does air go out, but when I let go, air comes back in. So, and it does seem to be centered around the valve stem, so it might be the same problem that I've had in the past with my other bike. I did hear a sound like I had hit something or something like that, but it was dark and late at night, so it's difficult to tell. Now the good thing is it doesn't look like there's any particular damage to the tire itself, other than normal wear and tear. This is the outside section, so for example you can see some scraping here, but that's probably just from hitting the curb. Yeah, and so even if I squeeze it on the opposite side, the side where the air rushes out is the side with the valve. So I'm going to go ahead and take this tire off and take the tube off and see if we can find out anything more. And I decided to try and put some air in it and see how much air it would hold, just in case it was a problem with the valve being open or anything like that. So I used my very small handheld air pump, this Airbone, and I put a couple hundred pumps in it, and it does fill up enough to hold itself, which is better than it was, but it's not really good. I think it's probably leaking air as I fill it, although I can't hear anything. If I press on it, I can hear something. Yeah, and it sounds like it's coming from around the valve stem. So I am going to go ahead and take off the tire and the tube, and then we'll have another look. Okay, so I have managed to remove the tire from the rim. That normally is not such a difficult thing, but this time it was extremely challenging. Basically, this tire is so tight on the rim that it's difficult to even get one tire lever in, much less two. And even with two, that wasn't enough to get it loose enough to get it started that you could just work around the rim. So I actually had to get tire levers in there in 3 spots. And the other thing is that because this is a tubeless ready rim, I did not want to risk damaging the inside liner, so I was a bit slow and sure with it instead of just kind of forcing my way in there. So, but at this point I've got the tire and inner tube out. I do not plan to reuse the inner tube, but I do want to test it just to see what the problem is, because I might keep it as an emergency if it can be patched easily. Interestingly enough, the culprit for such a large blowout was simply a very small hole right here. That is the only thing that is currently leaking air. So, I will patch that, and then I will keep this tire as a backup emergency tire. So I do plan to reinstall this tube as a backup emergency tube. I do plan to reinstall the tire itself tubeless this time, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But for this tire, I will patch it up later, and I will just keep it as a spare. So I marked up the area on the inner tube which had the flat, and I went ahead and washed this tire with soap and water. It's pretty much clean now, so I think it's ready to begin the next phase. I'm going to go find the valve stem that came with the wheels when I purchased the bike. So I went and found the goodie bag that came with my bike, and I did find these tubeless valves. So has a nice aluminum cover on it. They look pretty sturdy, pretty nice. Comes with this little valve core remover. There's two of those. I'll only be using one right now. There's extra cleat screws for the pedals. There's some chocks for the disc brake. There's some additional parts for, looks like, mounting a different seat. And there's actually the charger for the battery, which I have not used yet. But I'm going to go ahead and put this on the rim, and we'll see how things go. And I checked the rim for scratches or any sort of damage. There doesn't seem to be any at all. I also cleaned the inside where the rim tape is, and I attached the valve, as you can see here. So it's in there pretty sturdy. Now the next thing to do is to try to get the tire back on. Large amount of effort. I've managed to get the tire back on the rim. It's definitely not easy with this combination, but it was easier than getting it off. So I'm going to try to inflate the tire a bit with a regular pump, mainly because I don't feel like digging out the compressor. It probably won't work, but it's worth a try. And assuming that the tire itself also has a hole in it, I should be able to find that. So as you can see, we have identified the culprit. I did manage to get the tire filled up without a tube. It took quite a lot of effort, probably 1,000 pumps. As I was pumping air in, it was simply leaving. In order to get the pumping to work, I basically had to take the sidewall of the tire and pull it out to each side. And because this tire and rim is such a tight fit, I did manage to get it to work eventually. I did pump enough air in. I only really heard one pop, so it may not be seated completely to the rim, but it's enough that it's holding enough pressure that I was able to identify where the puncture is in this tire. So the puncture is basically right here. I can't see it, but there is certainly air leaking from it, and by putting soapy water there, I was able to determine the exact location. So that's fine. I think at this point we're going to let the air out, and we're going to fill it with sealant and try to see if that fixes the leak. After that, I'll probably go get the air compressor and use that to make sure that there's enough pressure and that the tire is actually seated. The distance from the rim to the bed of the tire looks to be consistent on both sides at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the rubber is locked into the metal. So, but again, it holds enough pressure so I can put in the sealant and see if that actually helps. So in order to put in the sealant, so I do have two different types of sealant. I plan to use this IRC, the Inoue Inoue Rubber Company, and I do have a little syringe which I can use to put that in there. I don't think I'll need it. I'm going to try without it first, and then we'll see how that works. So I'll be back in a minute. So amazingly enough, I was able to get the tire back up to pressure after adding the sealant using only my small hand pump, so I did not have to dig out the compressor. Right now it's reasonably firm, and You might see there's a little bit of foam here. This is sealant that has come out. Now that was not the hole that I found before. I didn't add quite as much pressure this time, and I couldn't get the hole that I found before to leak. The hole that I found before is over here, if you can see. May have a very small amount of sealant coming out now, but originally there was no air and no sealant, nothing. Whereas there's apparently another hole over here, so this started leaking, and I turned it around so that the sealant came to this part and it stopped immediately. So it may take a little while for that to dry out, but now I've turned it around a couple times and leaned at all different angles. It seems to be that those were the only two. Now it's interesting that the tire has two and the tube only has one, but presumably one didn't go all the way through the tube. So anyway, I would call this a success. It seems to be pretty sturdy. I will wait a little while and then I will put it back on my bike and go for a little test drive. I think first I'm going to give this wheel a good clean and then we'll see how it works out. So I've reinstalled the tire, took the chuck out of the disc brake, put the disc rotor in. I reinserted the through axle post. It was quite a pain to get the derailleur back on, but that seems to be working fine. I spun the wheel, I tested shifting, I tested braking. Everything seems to be okay, so we're going to take it out for a little test drive.